There are horrible endings for TV shows, and then there's Suddenly Susan. The show for a while was on top of the world. Starring actress and model Brooke Shields, it premiered in the fall of 1996 in the sweetest spot in television, nestled between Seinfeld and ER. And it was, at its peak, pulling in over 30 million viewers an episode. It had everything going for it, but somehow it only lasted 4 seasons. This was a short run of extreme highs, quickly followed by a kiss of death from its own network, tragedy with its cast, one of the most humbling endings I've seen making these videos, and then it was basically erased from existence. This is the rise, the drama, and the hard fall of Suddenly Susan. Now before we start, give this video a like if you watched Suddenly Susan back in the day, and subscribe for more retro TV deep dives. Okay, let's go back to good old 1995. Brooke Shields had spent her entire life in front of the camera. She'd been a Calvin Klein model, she'd starred in Pretty Baby and The Blue Lagoon. But that was all as a teen. By the mid-90s, at 30 years old, she was having trouble making the transition from her glory days as a child star. Her career needed a boost, and the show that gave her that boost was Friends. In early 1996, Shields guest starred on Friends as Erica Ford, an obsessive fan who believed Joey's Days of Our Lives character was a real person. Tens of millions of people saw it, and Shields, much to everyone's surprise, including her own, was pretty funny. And NBC took notice. As Shields put it, "It was because of my Friends episode that NBC wanted to do a show with me as the lead. No one had ever seen me in that light before. So Warner Brothers Television began developing a vehicle for her. And the original version of that vehicle was nothing like the Suddenly Susan you knew and loved." In the original version, Susan worked at a children's book publishing house. She'd just broken up with her live-in boyfriend Ted, played by Brian McNamara. Her boss was Eric, played by Philip Kasnoff. Her grandmother Nana was played by Nancy Marchand of Lou Grant fame, who would later become Tony Soprano's mother. Her best friend Marcy was played by Maggie Wheeler, who you may remember as the actress who played Janice on Friends. And a young David Krumholtz played a co-worker named Neil who had a crush on Susan. And then NBC blew it all up. They brought in Gary Dantzig and Steven Peterman, 2 veterans from Murphy Brown, to redevelop the entire concept. And pretty much everything changed. The setting moved from a publishing house to a fictional San Francisco magazine called The Gate. Susan was no longer a children's book editor, she was a copy editor turned columnist. And the supporting cast was almost completely replaced. Nancy Marchand was replaced by Barbara Barry. The parents, originally played by Kurt Fuller and Caroline McWilliams, were recast with Swissy Kurtz and Ray Baker. Maggie Wheeler and David Krumholtz's characters were completely eliminated. Showbiz is tough. The original boyfriend Ted was reworked into 2 new characters. Kip Richmond, the wealthy and vain fiancé Susan would jilt at the altar, played by Anthony Stark, and Kip's brother Jack Richmond, who would become Susan's boss and her on and off love interest, who would be played by Breakfast Club bad boy Judd Nelson. When you look at it, the show was a comeback vehicle for both him and Brooke. Filling out the cast was Kathy Griffin as Vicki Grainer, the Gates food and nightlife critic. Suddenly Susan was her first regular role on a primetime sitcom. Nestor Carbonell got the role as Luis Rivera, the magazine's photographer, and some fun lore about that role. Apparently, Craig Ferguson auditioned for Luis but didn't get it because his Cuban accent was unconvincing. But the casting director reportedly pointed him toward other producers, which landed him the role of Nigel Wick on The Drew Carey Show. David Strickland was cast as music critic Todd Stites. He was a relative unknown at the time, but would become a fan favorite. With everything finally in place, Suddenly Susan premiered Thursday, September 19th, 1996 at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. NBC put the show in what was, at the time, the most valuable real estate in television. Its lead-in was Seinfeld at 9, its lead-out was ER at 10. Those were the top 2 shows in America. The premiere episode set the stage. Susan walking out of her wedding to Kip Richmond, going back to the Gate to beg for her job, and getting assigned a brand new column called Suddenly Susan by Jack, her ex-fiance's brother. And America dug it. The premiere drew a whopping 30.12 million viewers. The second episode pulled 28.49 million. By episode 12 in January 1997, the show was still pulling north of 28 million viewers. Critics, though, were less enthusiastic. Karen James in the New York Times wrote that Like its lead character, Suddenly Susan has no identity of its own. Ken Tucker in Entertainment Weekly gave it a C. The Deseret News television editor Scott D. Pierce was even harsher in his review, writing that the show was loud, brash, and most of the gags weren't particularly funny. But everyone kind of saw the truth. If it's going to air between the number 1 and number 2 shows on television, good or not, it's going to be a hit. And they were right. By the end of season 1, with 22 episodes in the can, Suddenly Susan finished as the 3rd most watched show on American television. NBC renewed it, and then they took off the training wheels. Going into season 2, NBC pulled Suddenly Susan out of must-see TV Thursdays, moving it to Monday at 8 p.m., where it would go head-to-head against Cosby, and the audience instantly evaporated. The season 2 premiere on September 22, 1997 drew 13.02 million viewers. That's less than half the audience the show had been pulling at its peak on Thursdays. By mid-season, episodes were averaging under 10 million. The show ended season 2 ranked 65th overall, with a season average of 7.9 million viewers. From 3rd to 65th in the rankings, 44% of its audience gone. That is brutal. It was a textbook example of what showrunners and executives would describe openly as the kiss of death. When you move a sitcom out of its protected primetime slot away from its popular neighbors, the show stops being something people watch on autopilot. And if the show wasn't already reeling, it was about to deal with an unimaginable tragedy. On March 22, 1999, midway through the 3rd season, David Strickland was found dead in a Las Vegas motel room. He was just 29 years old. According to reports, Strickland had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had been struggling with substance abuse. He had reportedly stopped taking his meds. Now, Strickland had filmed several episodes that hadn't aired yet. Those went to air normally, but the season finale, A Day in the Life, was rewritten to deal with his death. The episode aired May 24, 1999. The plot follows Susan trying to find Todd, who didn't show up for work. As the day goes on, as she talks to people who know Todd, Susan learns of his quiet acts of kindness. The episode ends with the cast sitting in a circle, thinking positive thoughts, as Praise You by Fatboy Slim starts playing through the window, which was the song Todd had been singing all week. Then the phone rings, presumably with news about Todd's death, but we never get that direct resolution. Instead, it cuts to a montage of David Strickland. That, along with the cuts throughout the episode to cast members talking about the pain of losing their co-star and friend, made this a really touching tribute. The finale drew 12.35 million viewers, the highest rated episode of season 3 by a significant margin. But by that point, things were in a bad place. The show had dropped from 65th to 81st in the Nielsen rankings. The cast had lost one of its co-stars. It could have ended right there, but the network had already committed to a 4th season, and they were about to swing for the fences. Changes were already happening. Judd Nelson had left the show, as did Andrea Bendewald, who had played Maddie Piper since season 2. The 2 original showrunners, Gary Danzig and Steven Peterman, both stepped down. And the new showrunners, Maria Semple and Mark Driscoll, decided the only way to save the show was to essentially blow it up. So The Gate, which had been a trendy uptown San Francisco lifestyle magazine, became a struggling men's magazine being run out of a former warehouse in Chinatown. The new owner was Ian Maxtone Graham, played by Eric Idle of Monty Python fame. And with the new boss came a brand new staff, Sherry Shepard as executive assistant Miranda Charles, Curry Graham as sports writer Nate Naborski, and Rob Estes as freelance photographer Oliver Brown, who became Susan's new love interest. So the magazine, location, and cast were significantly overhauled overnight. And it didn't work. The season 4 premiere on September 20th, 1999 drew 8.07 million viewers. By the 3rd episode in October, the show was averaging 4.77 million. It got so bad, NBC yanked the show from its schedule in January 2000. Then put it back on briefly in June, then pulled it again with 5 episodes still unaired. One of those episodes never would see the light of day on NBC. As for the final 4 episodes, they were burned off in one of the most embarrassing ways in modern network television history. On December 26, 2000, between, get this, 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Eastern Time, NBC aired the final 4 episodes of Suddenly Susan back to back to back to back. The show that had been the third most watched program in America 4 years earlier ended in a graveyard slot in the morning after Christmas, with America Fast Asleep competing for viewership with infomercials. And then the show basically disappeared. Because it only had one big season, the show lacked buzz, so it was sold cheaply into syndication, and once affiliates found nobody was watching it, it got buried in overnight time slots to essentially run out the clock. And it didn't get a DVD release, so from 2003 to the 2010s, when digital storefronts and streaming became mainstream, it was pretty hard to find. Now, during its hiatus from public consciousness, the original cast for the most part went on to have successful careers. Brooke Shields took a step back from acting for a few years to focus on her personal life. She got married and had kids. She made a comeback in the late 2000s with Lipstick Jungle and starred as Morticia Addams on Broadway, but her biggest resurgence has been in the 2020s, especially with Netflix romantic comedies. She also successfully transitioned into entrepreneurship in her 50s, focusing on wellness, women's empowerment, and lifestyle content. Judd Nelson never headlined another hit series after Suddenly Susan, but he's worked steadily in guest roles on 2.5 Men and CSI New York, and appeared in films including Save Christmas in 2022, Dante's Hotel in 2023, and South of Hope Street in 2024. Barbara Barrie continued acting into her 90s, with credits including Law & Order, Dead Like Me, Nurse Jackie, and the 2023 film The Magnificent Mayersons. Kathy Griffin used Suddenly Susan as a springboard. She turned that visibility into a thriving stand-up career and the Emmy-winning Bravo series Kathy Griffin, My Life on the D-List, which ran from 2005 to 2010. She's been one of the most outspoken comedians of her generation, weathering several public controversies along the way. Nestor Carbonell got maybe the biggest career lift of anyone in the cast. He went on to play the agelessly mysterious Richard Alpert on Lost from 2007 to 2010, starred for 5 seasons as Sheriff Alex Romero on Bates Motel, played Mayor Anthony Garcia on Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, and most recently has been a series regular as Yanko Flores on Apple TV's The Morning Show. In reflection years later, Brooke Shields said the show never reached its full potential and was never as good as it could have been. And it's easy to think that given that it was a top 3 show in its first season. And of course, there was the tragedy of losing a co-star. But here's the thing. It was a top 3 show that needed to be next to Seinfeld and ER. The moment it was moved, the audience didn't follow. And if anyone doubts Seinfeld and ER's ability to lift a show, look what happened to the show that took over Suddenly Susan's 9:30 Thursday slot, Veronica's Closet, starring Kirstie Alley. The Veronica's Closet premiere drew 35 million viewers, which is actually more than the Suddenly Susan premiere a year earlier. And by the end of its first season, it finished as the 3rd most watched show on American television. Sound familiar? Same exact rankings Suddenly Susan hit in the exact same slot. Then, when NBC moved it to Monday nights, it lost more than half its audience, then got canceled. Any way you slice it, despite a great cast, Suddenly Susan just couldn't hack it on its own. As Jerry Seinfeld would say, that's a shame. If you enjoyed this deep dive, give the video a like and subscribe for more retro TV deep dives. Thanks for watching.